So what led me to launch RenewaNation? I would say the biggest impact on the launch of RenewaNation was my first pastorate in South Florida, right out of Bible college. They sent me to an inner city church, wonderful small group of people, and a lot of people began to get saved. Many of those wonderful folks were coming out of lifestyles of drugs and alcohol. They brought their beautiful children into our church. Those children were mostly unchurched. They had experienced a lot of unique challenges growing up in the home of an alcoholic or a drug addict. And the kids started getting saved. We end up with about 100 children and teenagers. And because none of them could afford Christian education, all of them, almost every single one of them were in a public school. We decided to invest heavily in those public schools, and we ended up being responsible for over 30 Christian clubs. We had a Christian club in every middle and senior high school in Broward County, Florida. Because of that, I went into those schools and started speaking, and my student ministries pastor was in those schools on almost a daily basis. It was there that I began to see the battle that was raging for the hearts and minds of our children. The teenagers would come into my office and say, "Pastor, everything you teach us here at church, they're teaching us the exact opposite at school." And I began to dream about the possibility. I began to think, what if I had these kids for 40 hours a week? I just had them for an hour on Sunday morning and a couple of hours on Wednesday night. But I thought, what if I had them for 40 hours a week? I could really change their thinking and help them to see all of life through a biblical lens. Unfortunately, I was never able to make that a reality in South Florida. But I moved to Virginia a few years later and discovered quickly that I had gone into a church that had some people who were really anti-Christian education. And one of my first board members, I asked the board, what's the best Christian school to enroll my daughter Juliana in, who was going into the second grade at the time? And one of the board members looked at me and said, "Why would you waste your money on a Christian school?" Miraculously, 2 years later, we launched Parkway Christian Academy. Watched that school grow to almost 400 children in the first 7 years. And it was there that I saw my dream become a reality. We were having all kinds of new families come into our church there in Virginia and come to Christ. They were enrolling their children into our school, many of whom had very little teaching from the Bible about who God is and His plans for their lives. And as they enrolled their children, and we watched them go through our school and saw hundreds of them graduate from our school, I began to think, this is how we could change America. And so in 2007, the day after Thanksgiving, I was in a hotel in downtown Cincinnati, and God spoke boldly into my heart. He asked me this question: what would you do with this hotel if you owned it? My first thought was, well, I'll never own this huge hotel. But then something seemed to speak boldly to me and say, you would fill it with thousands of students and give them a Christian worldview. And so the next day I drove home to Virginia, and all day long God seemed to speak to me and say, you're not going to be involved in just giving a few hundred children a Christian or biblical worldview education. You're going to be taking this to the masses. It was mind-boggling. I couldn't hardly imagine it. But in the fall of 2008, we launched RenewaNation. And in the fall of 2011, I left the pastorate and went full-time with this ministry. The first few years were tough. They were challenging. It was hard to get things rolling. And yet over the last number of years, God has done amazing things. And in just the last 3 years, we have seen more than 50,000 children begin a new or more rigorous process of developing a biblical worldview as a result of the influence of RenewaNation. And so it's been a thrilling ride. It's been a challenging ride. But God birthed this in my heart, and He's brought amazing people onto the team. And today we are truly making a very significant impact. So here's how we define the vision and mission of RenewaNation. I want to just say that at the beginning, it was pretty much all about Christian schools and Christian education, because that's all I knew. But God has really matured our vision, you might say. So now our vision is to transform our culture by giving millions of new children a biblical worldview. Our mission is to inspire and equip the family, church, and school to give children a biblical worldview. We have discovered that when you get the family, the church, and the school all teaching the same thing, all teaching God's truth, that is a three-stranded cord that is not easily broken. So again, our vision is to transform culture by giving millions of children a biblical worldview. Our mission is to inspire and equip the family, church, and school to give children a biblical worldview. So here's how we're accomplishing the vision and mission of RenewaNation. It's one thing to have a big vision. It's another thing to have the people and programming in place to actually accomplish your mission. So we have 5 primary areas of ministry. The first one and the center of all that we do is what we call promotion. Not promotion of RenewaNation, but promotion of the cause of giving children a biblical worldview. We speak, we write. We just published a brand new book, What is Biblical Worldview? We have a national magazine that goes out multiple times a year to thousands and thousands of families and homes. And whatever we can do to awaken parents, grandparents, pastors, Christian educators to the great need to be intentional about giving the children in their care a biblical worldview, that is what we do. That is the center of what we do. We call it our promotion division. Then we have a Christian education division. In this division, we start brand new Christian schools. We have a program to help launch schools in communities. We revitalize existing schools. So we go in and we assess them from top to bottom. We build a new strategic deployment plan, and then we coach those schools for up to 3 years. Right now, we have more than 25 schools in this program, and we're seeing a tremendous impact on these schools. So we start new schools, we rebuild or revitalize struggling schools, or just schools that want to get better. Also in the Christian education division, we have a homeschool component. We have startup coaching. So if you want to launch a homeschool, you want to start homeschooling your children, we have coaches that you can talk to. They'll help you every step of the way. We also have a program to help churches and communities build good homeschool co-ops. We're passionate about giving children a biblical worldview, we like to say, through any and all means. We also train teachers and administrators. In the last 2 years, we've trained about 1,400 teachers and administrators in biblical worldview. So we want to come alongside Christian schools and families who are homeschooling and give you the tools that you need to do that job effectively, and to make sure that when these kids are walking out of your care, when they're graduating from your school or your homeschool, they truly have an excellent education and they have a biblical worldview that will stand the pressure and the test that they're going to face all around the world. So that's our Christian education division. Then we have a church and family division. In this church and family division, we go into churches. We will do the same kind of revitalization program we do in schools, but it's different, obviously, because churches are very different. But we do assess the family life programs and ministries of churches. We help build new plans, strategic plans moving forward, and we'll coach those churches and those pastors for up to a year. That's a fantastic program. We also hold conferences for parents, biblical worldview conferences for parents, grandparents, pastors, educators, as a part of our church and family division. And then we have just a lot of other resources that we provide for churches and families, so that, again, when you've had a child from 0 to 18 years old, when they're 18, they leave your church well-grounded in a biblical worldview. Then our fourth division is our scholarship division. Right now, we are providing scholarships for over 700 children to attend Christian schools. Again, we want to do anything we possibly can to help children develop a biblical worldview. We know that going to a Christian school that's teaching a biblical worldview is one of the best tools for that, and that's why we support them. So right now in our scholarship division, we have what we call our general scholarship division. People just give to that, and we just sponsor children around the country. We have our program called Mayor's Military Kids. Those scholarship funds go directly to the children of military parents who want to place those kids in a Christian school. And then we have our tax credit programs in the state of Virginia and in the state of Kansas, where we're sponsoring hundreds of children to go to Christian schools. Our last division, we call our Miracle Division, is Manderley Christian Camp and Conference Center. God brought us a phenomenal partner who has given us almost 1,000 acres and the funds to build out our first 187 beds in cabins and lodges. It's a beautiful place. And we're using Manderley as a center for intensive biblical worldview training. Just recently, we had a group of teenagers here for a weekend, and we talked to them about what it means to have a biblical worldview. We challenged them in every way we possibly could. Again, we bring teachers here, we bring administrators here. this has become a center for intensive biblical worldview training. Those are our 5 divisions of ministry. Obviously, there's lots of other things we're doing that I didn't get into, but just wanted to highlight that those are the vehicles, you might say, we're riding in to accomplish our mission of giving millions of children a biblical worldview. I'll tell you exactly why the vision and mission of RenewaNation is critically important. It's important because over the last 40 years, the Christian church in America, we've literally lost about 80% of our young people. We raised them in the church. We didn't do a great job of giving them a biblical worldview. Most of them went K through 12 public education. And when they got off to the secular university, most of them were destroyed. And it's heartbreaking. I talk to parents and grandparents all over this nation who literally come up to me and say, Jeff, I wish I'd have heard you 30 years ago. I wish I'd have heard you 40 years ago. Many times tears are running down their cheeks because they're so devastated by the loss of faith in their children and grandchildren. So that's one reason. We've got to do something different than we did the last 40 or 50 years if we hope to get a different result. But the other reason, and the more positive reason, is what I have discovered is that when you lead a child to Christ and then help them over the course of many years in your school setting, in your home setting, to develop a biblical worldview, they literally will go out and change the world. Let me just tell you one story. We received TJ into our school when he was in about the 3rd or 4th grade. He was with us for a total of 9 years. He graduated in 2014. Fine young man from a fine Christian home, but wasn't a young man that was walking around just, holding a biblical worldview textbook in his hands all the time. He loved basketball, baseball, and pretty girls. He graduated from high school, and like a lot of young men, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. So he stayed at home for a year and went off to a local non-Christian college. It was going okay. He had an English professor that was anti-God, anti-Christian, pro-abortion. It seemed like this professor was for everything TJ was against and against everything TJ was for. And for whatever reason, this professor decided to have the class, split the class of 25 students in half, as much as he could, and have them debate all kinds of benign subjects, such as, what's the best restaurant in this city? And for whatever reason, TJ's debate team, the team that he was on, they kept winning debate after debate. One day, the professor came over to him and said, son, all I can say is that you really ought to think about being a lawyer because you're really good at this debate thing. TJ was the only young man or woman in that class who had had a biblical worldview education. The reason I think TJ was winning so many debates was because we had taught him how to think critically. And we taught him to know the truth and how to defend the truth and to analyze what was being said in our culture. So everything was going swell until the day the teacher stood up and said, today we're going to debate abortion. That was kind of a frightening thought to TJ. The teacher looked at the class and said, if you're for abortion, basically step over here, come over to this side. And TJ watched in horror as 23 students stood up and said they were for abortion. TJ was the only student who stood up and said he was against it. One young man said, I don't know what I'm for. I'm just going with TJ because he wins all the debates. Since there were so many for abortion, to the delight of the teacher, he said to the large group, you guys make your case first. And they did. TJ said something to me like, I thought this was going to be very difficult, very challenging. But the more they talked, the more I realized that their arguments weren't that powerful. And so they made their case, and the teacher then looked at TJ and said, TJ, it's your turn. He told me that he wished he'd listened a lot more in some of our worldview classes. But I'll tell you something, we had TJ for 9 years. And through those 9 years, we baptized that young man's heart and mind in God's truth. And when he needed it, it came to the surface. He started making his case, point after point. And when he was all done, he looked at that class boldly and said, in reality, every time someone has an abortion, they are taking the life of a precious child. As that teacher always did, at the end of that debate, he looked at the class and said, if you've changed your mind on this issue, switch sides. And TJ was amazed when all 23 young men and women came over to his side. Here's what we have discovered. If you take young men and women, lead them to Christ, teach them God's truth, help them to understand how God views every part of this world, and you unleash them on the culture, they can make a huge difference. It only took one TJ to influence 24 other young men and women who had never been taught the truth. Here's the mission of RenewaNation, the vision of RenewaNation. We want to roll millions of TJs into this culture because we know that when we do, they will make a huge difference, and God will use them, perhaps, to change the direction of our nation and our world. Thank you so much for taking a few moments to watch this video about the founding of RenewaNation and really what we're all about. If you want to get connected, go on our website, RenewaNation.org, go to the Get Connected button, and there are some great avenues to help you get plugged into what we're doing so that you can help us. You can be a part of the team that's giving thousands and thousands of new children a biblical worldview each and every year.